Good evening. Welcome to Two Way Tonight. Thank you for joining. I'm Mark Halperin, your host, correspondent, anchor, and guide through madness. Very grateful for all of you to join this evening in whatever time zone you find yourself in. If you're here on YouTube, welcome. This show's a little different. We believe in peace, love, and understanding, the presumption of grace for all, and not trade trash in the comments section. So please don't do that. If you're here on the Two Way platform, welcome or welcome back. Depending on whether you're here for the first time. Thank you for figuring out how to join via Two-Way. And if you'd like to ask a question, love if you'd raise your electronic hand, particularly if you've never done that before. Always love to hear new voices. We'll get to plenty of you tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about the economy. The great Zach Karabell's with us, and he's going to explain why the markets love the election results so far and what might happen next. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the transition. Now, it's extraordinary what's going on in Mar-a-Lago. Somebody just brought me some cough drops. Thank you. Thank you, young man. Want to come say hello to everybody? Come say hi. Just wave to the crowd.
Hello.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. The transition's a little out of control. It's kind of a tale of two transitions, kind of hard to describe. But on the one hand, Donald Trump is running a very orderly transition, yielding what has largely been, although not uniformly been, positive reviews for the people he's picked to be in his government. On the other hand, it is like Hunger Games meets House of Cards down there in Mar-a-Lago, where adult people with experience and great resumes are battling for jobs in a way that is unseemly and complicated, because Donald Trump will hand out jobs to people, multiple people, same job, and he'll also ask a lot of people, on the patio, what do you think of this person? What do you think of that person? And he loves the pageantry. Now, they have got him to not do the parade through the Trump Tower lobby as they did 8 years ago. That's a big difference. But what's happening behind the scenes is very similar. And again, you have people at the highest levels accusing other people at the highest levels of engaging in negative attacks, sometimes personal, sometimes not. And there's all sorts of people in Trump world who have influence. When people talk about Bill Clinton or Barack Obama or George W. Bush, the circle of influence is, most expansively 20 people with real influence. Donald Trump, the circles, my sense is it's much bigger. It's much bigger. And that means if you're trying to get a job, you can't rely on the two people running the transition or Susie Wiles saying, yep, you should feel good about your chances. Because Steve Bannon, Roger Stone, Don Jr., J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, Charlie Kirk, Bobby Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, there's any number of people who could run into the president or call the president-elect and say, oh, I don't like that person. It's incredible, the stories I'm hearing, a lot of which I can't share, but the general flavor of it is really brutal. And give you one example of the dynamic. A lot of people in Washington on Capitol Hill and lobbyists are greatly interested in who's going to get which jobs. They look at this with an extremely jaundiced and sophisticated eye. So last night it was reported, and then today again by other news organizations, first by CNN, that Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, is going to be the head of the Department of Homeland Security. It's not clear to most of my sources why she would get that job. why she'd be qualified for it, why Donald Trump would give her that particular position. And today it was not formally announced, even though a number were, which we'll run through in a moment. But people are wondering whether that this is some sort of mind by some combination of Donald Trump and Susie Wiles to sort of get the press to report something that's wrong and to see it floated as a trial balloon. In addition, you got a bunch of people with 2028 ambitions who think being in the cabinet is the best way to be positioned to run for president in 4 years. or to be J.D. Vance's running mate in 4 years if he ends up being the nominee. That's a subtext to this whole thing. Now, there were, as I said, some nominations or appointments made today. Go ahead and just start putting up photos and we'll talk about them. One person nominated today, or technically they're not really nominated. The paperwork's, I'm sure, not done, but they basically announced the intention to nominate. Mike Huckabee, also known as the father of the governor of Arkansas, is nominated to be the ambassador to Israel. He's got a long history of going to Israel. I'm sure he'll play an important role in all the Middle East deliberations, and the Huckabee family has gotten very close to the Trump family. So not a surprise that Governor Huckabee got a good job. As we say in Arkansas, Mazel Tov, Governor Huckabee. Next, John Radcliffe, who I forecast, I think, on the morning meeting yesterday was going to get a big job, is going to be the head of the CIA, former House member, and a guy with a lot of experience in national security, as with Congressman Waltz from Florida, who's going to be the head of the NSC. These are two guys with a lot of credibility, a lot of credentials in the national security field. Again, not a surprise that he's getting a big job. Next, Bill McGinley is going to be the White House counsel. Important job. He's been a Republican lawyer. He served as a cabinet secretary in Trump 1. Again, a MAGA loyalist through and through with a lot of legal credentials. Not a surprise. As we said, Kristi Noem, again, not formally nominated today or announced today. It'll be interesting to see if she doesn't get it. It'll be an interesting case study. The pace of appointments continues to be quite quick by normal standards. I don't have that down in hard numbers, but just my based on my recollection. And the policy formation continues to be very big. Now, we've seen, with the exception of the Pentagon secretary, we've seen a lot of the national security team named. The economic team remains largely unnamed. Head of the National Economic Council, head of Commerce, head of Treasury, those all remain unfilled. And there's, in MAGA world, a desire to make sure that those positions don't go to establishment types. But Donald Trump has chosen in his national security package team a balance between people with establishment credentials and MAGA foreign policy positions in the same people. In other words, it's not one of each, like a Noah's Ark thing. It's really people like Marco Rubio, previously more establishment, now more MAGA in their foreign policy positions. Some Washington insiders interpreting Mar-a-Lago, they may be wrong, see a national security team that's a little more MAGA, balanced by an economic team that maybe is a little bit more traditional establishment, center right as opposed to MAGA right. And part of that is style and tone and stray statements. Part of it is about tariffs. But it's also about this question of how fundamental will the changes sought be in the balance of power between Congress and the White House, in changing the nature of the federal government. The indications we're getting to establish, abolish the Department of Education, really big overhaul of the UN, big overhaul of the Pentagon. If you look at all the Republican presidents since Reagan, including Reagan, Bush 1, Bush 2, were never going to be bulldozers of the establishment. They just weren't. Bush 43 looked for some change, no doubt, but he was not a bulldozer against the establishment. Reagan talked that way, but he had a Democratic-controlled House and some of the time a Democrat-controlled Senate, and did not really follow through on this rhetoric of fundamental change. Trump 1 did some things along those lines, but really, if you kind of tally it up, and of course COVID intervened, but if you tally it up, there wasn't a ton of fundamental change. There was changes in the tax code, changes in energy policy, changes in regulation. but not a fundamental remaking of what people in MAGA land would call deep state, of the culture of the liberal culture, moving vast numbers of federal employees out of Washington. For all of the talk of Project 2025, which Donald Trump did not write or own, but the Democrats tried to make the big campaign issue of it, there is a desire to fundamentally change things. And the people coming in are coming in with a president-elect who is 4 years wiser. And we've talked about this a little bit, but the more I think about it, the more important it seems. A normal two-term president in his second term is exhausted, and his staff is exhausted because they're 5 years in. And they are wiser, but they don't have the momentum of coming out of typically a more dominating re-election. Most incumbents, not all, but most reelected incumbents have a smaller victory the second time. Why is this president different? Number one, he was out for 4 years and had 4 years to think about all this and to formulate policy and to think about what he did wrong the first time from his point of view. They've also rested because although some of them have been through a campaign, they haven't governed for 4 years. And he won, he won the popular vote this time. He didn't last time. So arguably, he's got a greater mandate than he did the first time. All of those things, I think, open the possibility to some pretty radical change. And I'm using radical in a neutral way, just fundamental about changing the nature of the federal government. And we've seen some of this talked about, not just tariffs and deportations, but changing the nature of the federal government, appointment of more judges to dominate that branch. There could be some very big changes here. And as long as the Democrats remain divided, more difficult for them to do anything to stop it. I've had conversations with some people today about the prospect that Donald Trump will reach out to Democrats on some issues in order to get things passed, but also to take advantage of and try to consolidate some of the gains he made with the so-called coalition of the ascendant, the Obama coalition, younger voters, non-white voters. And we'll see where the Democrats can end up. All right, I'm going to have a few more things to say, but I want to get Zach Karabell in to talk about the economy. I want to get to your questions before too long. So if you'd like to get in a question and you're here on the two-way platform, please raise your hand. Letter that somebody sent to me. I don't normally read the hard copy of anything anymore. I'd like to, but I don't. And I don't almost ever read the letter section of anything, like reading the comments. Life's too short. But one of you sent me a letter that was in the New York Times. You can put that full, which I want to read to you. I don't know that they normally run letters like this in the New York Times. Progressive liberals, your presumption of the moral high ground, your smug and arrogant judgmental sense of elitist entitlement, your malicious hate, envy, name-calling, and abusive persecution of your opponents through the use of the media and the justice system have all been rejected by the American people. It wasn't just the economy or the border or crime or the international disaster you've created through your weakness, nor the wokeness you've used to silence those who disagree with your liberal agenda. It was so much more than that. It was the sense of fairness that runs deep in all Americans and the desire for freedom and justice. You have been rejected, and you have a lot of work to do to ever be relevant again. Signed, Charles Michael Sidero of Ormond Beach, Florida. Lori Blackford, please book that guy. I'd like to have him on. Quite a letter to run in the New York Times. Small thing. You could read verbiage like that probably every day somewhere on the internet and social media. But pretty interesting that the New York Times ran that letter, I would say. All right. Again, we're going to get to your questions in just a minute. Let's bring in Zach. For those of you who don't know, Zach is a very interesting guy and, by the way, a genius. Zach, welcome.
Wow, that's quite an intro.
Thanks for joining again. We love having you on. Why have the markets been so frothy and delighted since the American election? What's caused that, do you think?
All right, well, I mean, stock markets have been frothy and delighted. Bond markets have been like, oh my God, have been much more, oh, I don't know if I can curse in this, but you get my idea. So I think you have to keep that in mind. So bond markets are basically saying that you're going to have a Republican Senate, Republican House, Republican in the White House, whose inclination is going to be to cut taxes and not cut spending nearly as much as taxes are cut. And while there may be some interest in dealing with the Social Security issues, the willingness to do so politically has, at least to date, proven to be non-existent. Really easy to fulminate against, oh my God, we got to do
Yeah.
something about Social Security, Medicare, very hard to go back to your
Less than
constituents.
non-existent. Less than
So
non-existent.
bond markets are basically saying this is going to be a spend, 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 very much unlike a typical Republican administration of the past. Um, and you're also going to get tariffs, which, contrary to what Donald Trump, I believe, believes himself, I do think Trump, in good faith, is just simply economically wrong about tariffs. Uh, that doesn't make it excusable. It just means tariffs are paid for by the person or the company importing the goods, not by the country or the company exporting the goods. That is not a debatable subjective statement. That's just literally how tariffs are collected. And that is, if it happens at any broad scale, going to be a cost that is going to be borne because it will likely be passed on by companies to consumers by American voters, citizens.
Well,
And therefore,
let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question about that. If that's true, and I know that it's true, why would any government put on tariffs?
so there is a theory of the case that tariffs at a sufficient level will force companies to either shift manufacturing away from China or shift manufacturing back to the US. There's probably some evidence that at some level, maybe 6% tariffs on Chinese goods is that level, companies will have an incentive to shift production away from China. They will not, however, have an incentive to shift production to the United States. They will have an incentive to shift production to the Philippines or to Vietnam or to Thailand or Turkey or Mexico or elsewhere. And then you get the whack-a-mole game of, are you going to start just putting massive tariffs on all these countries? And then you have the issue of, you cannot just snap your fingers and magically recreate supply chains, right? That is not an overnight thing. Apple could say tomorrow they're not going to make any more iPhones in Foxconn factories in Shenzhen. It will still take 4 to 6 years to totally rejigger that, and a lot of money. Uh, Maybe the federal government will decide. I mean, you could say, look, we should just do 100% tariffs on everything, reshore everything, and spend trillions of dollars to underwrite the cost of that. And then you will, in fact, have the kind of vision that Trump and some Republicans and some Democrats like Sherrod Brown had forever. I just
Well,
don't see that happening.
let me ask you this. What is the current status? Just freeze where we are. What is the current status of the equity between tariff and non-tariff barriers the Chinese have against us and the ones we have against them?
We are incomparably a more open market than China, but
Right.
that's like saying we're an incomparably more open political system than China. Like, do we want to be as closed as China?
Well, no, but I think we want them to be more open.
Right, but
I think what Donald Trump actually believes is not that tariffs are a good idea on an economics. I think he believes that tariffs are a good idea as a sword to to swing at the Chinese to try to force change on their part. That's what I think he thinks.
it may be, but it's unclear what that change would be. China is not buying much of what we are producing except for food, right? China buys plenty of American soybeans and grain, which was the first thing they retaliated against in 2018, which led to 20 to 30 billion dollars of federal subsidies to help those Iowa and Indiana, largely soybean farmers, to compensate for the loss of the Chinese market. Like, we don't manufacture stuff that we can sell to China primarily. We don't make high-end semiconductor equipment the way Dutch companies do or South Korean companies do. So I don't quite know what the negotiation will be. China could be more open to our companies, but you can't simultaneously say you're going to penalize American companies by producing in China and then try to strike a deal that lets American companies sell more to China. It's a series of very confusing messages if you're a large company on the receiving end of that.
Okay, so you explain why the bond markets are not happy. Why are the stock markets happy?
Because, companies are thinking probably legitimately that if Lena Khan and the FTC stop ideologically trying to prevent mergers and acquisitions and there is in fact this huge amount of government and or tax relief that leads to more consumer spending, that you're going to have this efflorescence of economic activity, which, by the way, some of which was happening anyway. I mean, the stock markets have done incredibly well up to the election this year.
Yeah, that's
Do
true.
not listen to Fox News saying, "Oh my God, look how well the markets are doing." The markets have been doing really well. It's been a
Yeah.
great year for stocks, right? It was a great year under Biden. It'll probably be a great time under Trump. And no matter who was president, a lot of the inflationary pressures have subsided, and things were kind of setting up for a pretty good year. Kind of whoever won this election, I think, would have been able to take a lot of credit for look how good the economy is because of me. Now
Right.
it's going to be Trump who gets to say because of me. So, and of course, crypto assets are doing like phenomenally, and that's probably the most actually rational of these responses, because you had Gary Gensler at the SEC. You had a really kind of negative approach to crypto assets under Biden, and you have a much more open approach under Trump. And so, if you're looking for like that particular asset class to do well, there's a reason it's doing well.
Yeah. Zach, someday you'll come back as well, someone who knows the rules of cricket, and you'll try to explain crypto to me, and the other guy will explain the rules of cricket, and we'll see which I understand first, because
It's,
I don't
it's just
understand either.
it's just a
Yeah.
magical digital currency, Mark. That's all
Yeah.
you need to know.
So
It's a magical digital currency.
Does the United States have a comparative advantage in crypto the way we do in pop music?
We just have a lot more money, so we have a
Yeah.
comparative advantage of more money. So if more
Okay.
Americans invest in more crypto,
Right.
the net effect of that globally is crypto goes up, right?
Right.
Just
All
because
right.
we have more money.
Two other things that Donald Trump would say have American businesses and markets excited. One is more deregulation, one is more
Right.
energy production.
Right.
Are those two things that could help the economy in a material way?
I am sorry to say, and you can all flame me and shout at me, energy production policy matters almost not at all to energy production. Under Trump 2016, no, 2018 to 2020, permits on offshore drilling were handed out like candy, and there was no more offshore drilling. Like oil companies are going to extract oil domestically based on demand for oil globally. That's the only reason. So it doesn't
And respond to price. But
correct.
what about doing things like building pipelines?
Uh, the fact is our energy intensivity is going down. I mean, who's the largest wind producer in the United States? You know the answer to this.
I don't
Texas.
know. Oh,
Texas is
yeah, the
like the
state.
Saudi Arabia of wind. And it's a good energy source. So, like, Americans are embracing all sorts of renewables because they're a good source of energy. And we've got a lot of different, we've got a lot of sun and we got a lot of wind. It's a big country.
Yeah.
And the price of oil is not going up. And what's going on in the Middle East isn't going to change that. I mean, even if Israel bombed all of Iran's refineries, it wouldn't really matter in the sense of it doesn't change the equation radically.
Okay. All right. What about deregulation?
Deregulation clearly is a positive thing, but getting it done is, look, I am fascinated to see if the Trump administration is able to sort of uh, do a game of chicken, of really break the regulatory logjam. Because the fact is, there is a process to create rules in the bureaucracy, and there is a process to remove rules. And they are both incredibly arduous and incredibly slow. It is very hard. I mean, you know this better than anyone. It's really hard to deregulate. It's very hard to remove a rule.
Yeah.
You can probably instruct some of the bureaucracy to not enforce certain rules or to enforce them more loosely. That's not really deregulation any more than it's more like the equivalent of decriminalization of drugs, right?
Right.
You don't remove the rules, you just don't enforce them. That's easier. Clearly, Trump, Musk et al. Want to remove them. And look, I happen to believe that we could do well from a lot of deregulation. So it'll be interesting if they're able to kind of do an end run around that process and actually try to remove rules. But it's hard to see the courts honoring that. The best you're going to get is um, de-emphasis on enforcing regulations. And I think some
What
of
if,
that will be good. But companies that are building like a 5-year plant, right? They're building a new venture, can't afford to rely on non-enforcement because that's too
yeah,
precarious. It's
their
too
lawyers wouldn't
will o'
let
the
them do
wisp.
that. Yeah. What sectors would benefit from deregulation that where America is strong?
I mean, nuclear energy would hugely. I mean, the rules around the development of nuclear energy are ridiculous. I mean, they're mind-numbing. Rules around lots of drug discovery, innovation. I think RFK in a lot of ways is a bizarre human. Some of what he says about FDA and that framework is probably worth listening to.
Yeah.
Musk has dealt with years of, on the one hand, being a government contractor. I mean, honestly, SpaceX is a NASA subcontract. That's what SpaceX, and they're
Yeah.
really good at it, but they're a government contractor. But he's also dealt with just, I'm sure, absurd pettiness along the way of just, you didn't
Right.
dot your I's, dude.
Right. I should have talked about Musk when I was talking about how crazy the transition is. I'll do that tomorrow. Have you ever heard of this guy, Howard Lutnick?
Sure.
Would he be a good Treasury Secretary?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, like, so Lutnick came to some degree of fame. I have some experience with this because Cantor Fitzgerald was one of the largest firms to be impacted in the attacks on
Yeah.
9/11. They lost a lot of people. Howard Lutnick lost his brother. He kind of rebuilt Cantor Fitzgerald into a bond trading and financial markets powerhouse. I don't know when he made the MAGA transition. He was not, particularly prominent in 2016 to 2020. He's clearly competent in the sense of he knows the markets and markets would have confidence in him. Back to your point about who's being appointed right now, I'm actually struck by the fact that these are all incredibly hardline people, but they're all professionals, right?
Yeah.
If Kash Patel had been appointed to be the director of the CIA, which would have been a
Yeah.
ludicrous appointment just in terms of experience and time, and probably wouldn't have even gotten through a Senate that was compliant, we'd be having a different discussion. These are all people who can credibly
Yeah. They're
execute and
credentialed.
understand policy, right? They get how the
Yeah.
world works.
Yeah. I mean,
And
they
that's
could have been,
that's actually that's very different than the first term, right? I mean, Rex Tillerson
well,
had no business being Secretary of State.
well, there were some people who were credentialed, but
Oh, there were.
I
There
think some of
were.
these people could have been picked by Mitt Romney to be
Right.
in the same jobs. What about Scott Bessent, who's been on two-way before? Does he seem like somebody the markets would like if he were picked?
Yeah, I mean, he's not clearly as high profile as some of these other people. And I think Trump, given a choice, prefers people who have I mean, it's an odd thing, right? He wants loyalty, but he also wants stars. And right now, you could argue he's found a little bit of both. I mean, I don't necessarily like how Mark Rubio's career has evolved, and I think he clearly, you listen to what he said about Trump in 2016, he's clearly changed his mind about Trump, or he hasn't changed his mind about Trump, but he's made terms with it. Um, but I would think that they will want a higher profile person, and Lutnick is a bit more higher profile, and we'll see if Kudlow gets something in the White House or Treasury. So that remains to be seen. I'm pretty sure it's MAGA loyalists who are hoping for populist economic policy are likely to be disappointed.
Why do you say that?
Because this is likely to be kind of Wall Street economic policy.
But why do you say that?
Because I
What
think
makes
that's in
what
sync.
makes you think that?
I think that's in sync with the direction, everything that Trump has said about economic policy, cutting taxes, um, investing in the country and in American business, freeing them up to innovate and invest is a very much kind of Wall Street Fortune 500 set of policies.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Thank you for that. All right, folks, if you got questions about the economy, Zach's your man. Don't miss this opportunity. Or if you just want to talk about the administration, the Democrats, whatever's on your mind, I'll call on you. You'll come in, you'll say who you voted for in the election, where you are physically, and then you'll tell us what's on your mind. Even if you've been here before, please repeat it because not everybody's been here. Scott. Scott is a popular name currently in Washington and in Trump circles. Scott Bessent. Other Scots may get jobs. Scott McConnell, welcome in. Tell folks where you are, who you voted for, what's on your mind.
Hi, Mark. I'm in Bridgehampton, but I live in D.C. I voted for Trump 3 times now, um, and I want to ask your view about what do you think it's plausible that Tulsi Gabbard could get appointed to. I'm a fan of hers. I think she's courageous and charismatic, though obviously she's never administered a big
Yeah.
organization before.
Yeah. I think she could get a job at the NSC in a senior role, maybe a counselor to the president, maybe head of the VA, although that is a big administrative job, maybe a secretary of the Army. Um, or she could choose to stay out and just be a free-floating advisor to the president. I'd say those are probably the most likely things. But Donald Trump really appreciated what she did, not just endorsing and switching parties and coming out and campaigning with him, but he really appreciated the way she talked about him
Yeah.
in a way that we'll never know how big a difference any of the surrogates made. But just as a student of Trump's body language and sort of gaze, and from talking to folks around him, he appreciated it. I don't know what she wants, but I suspect she could have it if she wanted,
Yeah,
almost
I mean,
whatever she wanted.
he should appreciate it. I think her and Kennedy too, for all his oddities, were real assets in the campaign and really made a difference.
Yeah. What would you like to see President Trump do on the economy in the first year?
You know, he had a kind of Wall Street influenced economy during his first term, and in terms of populism, that worked out okay. To be honest, I mean, that's everybody, all working class people thought they were doing better. I don't know if it would under more fraught economic circumstances, but I don't think there's. I think if he goes in a sort of what Wall Street wants direction, that would be fine with me.
Yeah, what would that include?
Lower taxes, deregulation. I'm kind of the view that what presidents do in foreign policy is more important than what they do in economics. And secondly, the cultural tone they set is more important. I think the economy kind of works its way out, it works itself out anyway.
Are you or your family affected at all by high deficits and debt?
No, I mean, children and grandchildren, but personally, me, no.
Okay. Thank you for joining. Appreciate it, Scott. Come back often. All right. Raleigh, come on in. Tell folks where you are, who you're supported for president. What's on your mind, please?
Am I muted?
No, sir. You're loud and clear.
Okay. Hi, I'm from Texas. I supported Trump. Um, yeah, I was not expecting to get called upon. I love this platform. My question is, not dealing with the economy. But I was wanting to know, if Win Red catches up with Act Blue, how well will the Democrats perform? Because right now they've got a huge financial advantage. And what
Yeah.
happens if they lose that? Will they perform even as good as they're doing now? Because they're not even winning now.
Yeah. Well, they did win a lot of Senate races that they might have lost had the Republicans had more money. I think it's one of the big unanswered questions. I ask people in politics about it all the time. Why are Democrats better raising money online? It's true that WinRed started later than Act Blue, and for those of you who don't know, these are the main or excuse me online portals used by the two sides to raise small dollar contributions. And the example I always give is Jamie Harrison, who's the chair of the DNC now, ran against Lindsey Graham for Senate in South Carolina, complete long shot, and he raised like more than $100 million, mostly online, more than like most Republican presidential candidates raise online. It doesn't, there's no obvious reason why they're better at it just because their platform started earlier. Republicans just haven't figured it out. They used to be great, better than Democrats at raising small dollar donations in the pre-digital age through direct mail. So when you say Win Red catch up to Act Blue, I think you're asking about what an impact it would have. I'm saying usually you imagine the money's helpful, particularly in down ballot races, and it's a sign of grassroots strength. I think there's a real puzzle to be solved, which I haven't heard anybody talk about, let alone solve. How did Kamala Harris have so much grassroots strength that she broke records in raising small dollar contributions, but that did not translate to turning out the vote? To the contrary, that doesn't really make sense to me. It's part of why I thought she might win, because of all that grassroots support. If Republicans had more money, particularly in down ballot races, they would do better. They lost some of those Senate races, I think, because their candidates were outspent. The only Republican who won a Senate race in one of the battleground presidential states was Dave McCormick,
Pennsylvania.
who I think had more money because of his own personal wealth, but also he had a very well-funded super PAC. The other ones, I don't know the final numbers, but I think most of them were outspent. Same with the House races, where Democratic House candidates had a lot more money. So the answer to your question is, I think clearly they would do better if they raised more. But the more interesting question to me is, why aren't they able to raise as much as Democrats? House, Senate, presidential candidates. I don't understand why Republicans have more trouble getting people to click. I've been reporting on that for several years. I've never gotten to the bottom of it. I'll still try. Raleigh, thank you for coming. Appreciate it. All right.
Can I get in one thing more?
Yes, sir.
Bunch of people in the chat were asking to speak about the Chevron decision, overturning
Yeah.
it, how that's going to affect deregulation. So I
Thank
thought
you for reading the
I'd
chat. I never do. Please address it.
well,
That's an
there
important
you go.
topic.
Uh,
Mm.
I think there's a misconception that Chevron throws out regulations. What it does is it removes the presumption that agencies that determine how statutes get implemented and get to kind of fill in the blanks of legislative language, there will no longer be deference to those agencies by default, which means that companies can challenge how the EPA or the FDA interpret those regulations in court and will be kind of adjudicated by judges as to whether or not those challenges appear to be fair. So it doesn't actually create any kind of immediate or easy pathway to deregulation. It creates an immediate and easy pathway to challenge how various agencies have implemented legislation in regulations. I'm not trying to be convoluted here. It's not a magic wand of now the government can itself use Chevron. It actually it allows for challenges, but it's not like the Trump administration can come in and wave the flag of the Loper decision and say this allows us to remove regulations. That's not how the decision works, and it's not how it can play out legally. So if you're hoping that this is now like, wow, we can all just go ignore environmental assessment reviews because we think the EPA has overstretched its authority based on an interpretation of some statute, it will definitely allow an oil company or any company to challenge that and be heard in court in a different way. And I'm sure will likely over the years lead to some of these regulations either being rewritten or thrown out. But it's not an immediate process.
What's occurred since the decision? That's a change.
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay. All
I
right.
mean, I'm sure
Welcome
that
in.
I shouldn't say, I'm sure there are court cases that you and I don't know about that
Yeah.
haven't like made their way, and I'm sure there's
Yeah.
court cases being prepared.
Yeah. All right. Laura Morris, Scott Mercer, welcome to you both. Laura, you
Hi.
first. Where are you located? Who'd you vote for?
I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I was a Harris supporter, lifetime Democrat.
Yep.
And I'm in a James Carville, Mary Madeline marriage where my husband is a Republican, and he's loves President Trump. It's one of the reasons I came on two-way was to spend the last few months really trying to get inside the head of Trump supporters and understand. I really saw the writing on the wall in this place about where I knew he was going to win and all the reasons that so many people were turning away from the Democratic Party and just the policies. But what I really came on here to say is that we have a transgender son who is a married guy with beautiful children. And we're scared for him because that ad that Trump very smartly ran was like the Willie Horton ad. That was it. I mean, I'm sure that it, not only Pennsylvania, but many other states, when you saw that ad, if you were somebody that was not understanding of a transgender person, I mean, I'm not even for funding of that whole thing is just made me even go, whoa, that's just not, not good. But what it did is it dehumanized somebody like my son and made them just, somebody to be feared, and it mischaracterizes a lot of transgender people and makes people afraid to be in a bathroom with them. That's the bottom line. And transgenderism has nothing to do with sex and sexuality. It's their gender. And so there's a lot of education that's going to have to go on in this country to help people that are transgender just not to be feared. And the sports thing is a very valid thing. I don't believe that transgender males should be in women's sports. So it's so complicated. But my question, I guess, would be, Um, do you think that that ad took it a little too far, or is that exactly what they meant to do, was to just dehumanize them and make them seem almost like an animal?
Yeah.
That's how I felt. I mean, it made me cry. It was so
Yeah.
sad. And if you're a parent of somebody who changed their life, was obviously the opposite sex, and it made him just blossom into a human being. Um, was that ad
Laura,
a little too much?
yeah, no, Laura, I'm sure it's true of every parent on this meeting, but hopefully true of others. You can hear the emotion in your voice and the challenge you face in describing how you went through the campaign because of that ad. So very grateful to you for sharing all that. I'm going to address it in just a second. Scott, where are you and who'd you support for president?
Hi, Mark. First, let me I'm in Southern California, a small town called Redlands, and I supported Trump. Excuse me. Before I ask a question, I just want to compliment you. I discovered you about 2 weeks before the election, and I think your platform here is the reason I'm still sane. It's been very valuable. My question is about.
Scott, hold on for your question just 1 second. Okay. I just want to address Laura's first, and then we're going to get to yours.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Laura, I'm gonna ask Scott to address first. Scott, if you don't mind, what do you think of what Laura said about that ad and about these complicated issues?
I think the ad was over the top, but a lot of the activity has been over the top on the other side also. I mean, there are going to be some regrets about what's happened in this election in terms of on both sides, in terms of what's said about each side. And we are where we are, right?
Yeah, we are. We are.
Yeah.
It's going to take a lot of communication, and that's why I've been on two-way and just trying to listen and understand, because for the last 8 years, I've just been opposed. And I decided to stop being opposed. My husband and I can speak more, now, and interchange and understand each other, because I've been listening to Trump supporters and why they like him. And next step is to try to understand him, which is,
Yeah.
a whole nother ball of wax.
Yeah. Laura, I would say that there's nothing in that ad that wasn't factual.
Yeah.
But I can also say from being at Trump rallies where videos were shown of trans people that there was an effort to dehumanize and mock, and it's certainly the way it was received by a lot of Trump supporters. The challenge, I think, is on both sides. On the Trump side, to have more grace and understanding. But on the Democratic side, I think if the vice president had been more forthright about her position, it would have put her in a stronger place to defend
I agree.
trans people.
Yeah.
What would you say to President Trump if he said, I appreciate your family situation. How would you like me to talk about this issue? What would you say?
I would say to not pull the rug out from under the LGBTQ community, to listen to us and to the families and to our concerns and our health care. And I understand taxpayer funded, but maybe just take it easy and listen to us, because they have to have their health care once they've, children is one thing, but adults that have already transitioned and need hormones and things like that, you don't pull the rug out, listen, and let's take our time on this, because it's very volatile right now. And I saw something where he just said, we're going to just stop all this craziness. I mean, you can't send a child home and I mean, child to school, and they're going to come back another gender. That just is a flat out lie. It doesn't happen. And so we need to just take the temperature down around the whole issue, and maybe appoint somebody in his administration that can listen a little more. And I don't even know if that's possible.
Yeah, Laura, thank you. Stay with us. Hey, Scott, when you said you're a Trump voter, but this platform helped keep you sane, can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, living in Southern California, I'm in the minority here in terms of my political viewpoints. And it's, it's very unpopular to just even express them in some venues.
Yeah.
And it gets frustrating. It's everything else that's in center of your platform about the people who've discovered it. It allows me to listen to other folks, other points of view in an environment which is a learning environment rather than a confrontational environment,
Yeah, I
which is
appreciate that.
it's the way it should be.
Can I
Yeah,
say one
thank
more
you.
thing, Mark?
Yes, ma'am.
The Democrats, I was very disappointed in Kamala that she didn't speak up on that issue at all. She didn't say anything, and except we're following the law or something like that. And the whole Democratic Party has got to stop being so afraid of offending one or the other or somebody, it's just the Democratic Party is broken, and I've been a member of it my whole life, and my parents raised me in it, and I've campaigned and worked on campaigns, and things have got to change in a big way.
Laura, thank you for that. And please come back tomorrow night. We're going to talk more about what the Democratic Party needs to do.
Okay.
Scott, go ahead and ask your question. Thank you for waiting.
Yes, Mark, I wonder which direction you think Trump will go with the AG appointment. And once that appointment is made, what sort of free rein will that individual have to do what probably needs to be done in both Justice and FBI to right the ship?
Yeah, I don't know. I've spent a fair amount of time reporting on it and thinking about it, talking to people about it. I think of all the concerns that people have about whether he'll use the power of the presidency to not just violate niceties and norms, but to really abuse the office and the power. I think that the certain kind of attorney general could do that. So I really hope he picks somebody who they don't have to be establishment or not change anything, but I hope they'll have respect for the rule of law and the independence of the Justice Department. I don't believe that Donald Trump will try to, or if he does, it'll get away with having his political opponents prosecuted. I just don't believe that will happen, no matter who he is.
He's bigger than that also.
Yeah, I just don't believe he will. But I don't have a strong feeling about who it will be. But, one of the things about President Trump is he's more of a student of history than he's normally given credit for. And he's familiar with how John and Bobby Kennedy ran the White House Justice Department combo. He's familiar with how Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon dealt with the Justice Department. And unfortunately, I think his attitude is, I'm not going to be the sucker president who doesn't take at least as much advantage as my predecessors did of the power of this office. And I hope he doesn't do that with the Justice Department in a way that, again, doesn't respect the rule of law. I'm watching closely to see who he picks. I also think that even though the Senate's 53 majority Republican, and even though I think most of his nominees will be confirmed quickly, I think if he picks someone substantially below the caliber of the people he's selected so far, I think there's a chance that Senate will say no.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful that he'll pick someone great. I'm hopeful that there won't be an abuse of power, but I do worry about it because I know he thinks, well, Bobby Kennedy did it. Why can't I? That's my concern.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you both for coming on. I very much appreciate it. And Laura, as I said, please come tomorrow night if you can. Steve Elmendorf will be here, and he's going to talk about the party. Zach, you want to weigh in on these trans issues?
No, I actually don't.
Okay.
No,
Harold,
I think the commentary was very good, and I really appreciated her sharing. So I think that's important to kind of remember. There is a humanity behind the politics. I know that sounds incredibly cliche, but I think it's very important.
It's very important. Harold, welcome back. Not everybody knows where you live or who you voted for, so please share and then what's on your mind.
Thank you. I am from North Carolina. I voted for Trump, and kind of my question was for your guest about my favorite pick. I'm an Iraq and Afghanistan veteran, and I really, really like the pick of Michael Waltz for National Security Advisor. And I know that he's been really hawkish on China, which I'm a fan of. But do you think that like this nexus between Rubio and Waltz and these folks that are going to be hawkish on China and Trump, potentially putting tariffs on China if he does that, how do you see the administration, this coming administration's stance on China, and what do you think that impact will be economically?
Great
So
questions.
look,
Zach.
I've been writing about China for 15 years. I spent a lot of time managing a fund that invested in Chinese and U.S. companies from 2001 to 2002, 2009. I think the emerging Cold War between the United States and China is a profound sadness for the world and an equal, certainly a product of Xi Jinping, but definitely a product of Americans responding to it. I think the thing that we miss about China confrontation is even with the past 6 years of rather intensive economic freeze and some decoupling, the United States and China remain trillions of dollars intertwined in terms of trade and production in a way that we can argue about whether the harms have outweighed the benefits. But, using the Cold War as a framework just is fatally incorrect because you never had that economic intertwinement. So you can say, look, China's the enemy and we should get out of there in all ways. But unless you're willing to deal with the economic consequences of doing so in a really aggressive fashion, you need to honor the degree to which we have become entwined. At one point, I likened it to a bad marriage without an easy divorce. And the rhetoric suggests that it's an easy divorce, and the reality dictates that it's not. And I'd like to see more realism about, even if you believe that China is the existential threat to the United States, you do have to deal with the real world consequences of how intertwined we are and how you get out of that in a way that doesn't do you more damage than presumably it does your adversary. And when I hear the kind of like tough, we can do all these things, I mean, you don't want China to collapse globally. Like that is a really bad outcome for the world, even if you can triumph it, right? Because China's economic pattern within the globe is much greater than the Soviet Union's ever was. You should not wish for China's implosion. You might wish for its change. You might wish for Xi Jinping to eventually exit the scene and China to resume the path it seemed to be on from, let's say, 1996 to 2014. But you don't want China to implode. And if you keep talking about it as an enemy and you get to that point, you've kind of like, I think, lost sight of that. So look, there's a bipartisan consensus that China is an adversary. Trump is avoiding people who see it that way, as did Biden, by the way. The only difference is Biden did it quietly and Trump will do it loudly. It's also possible, as Mark mentioned, look, Trump could, also strike a deal with China and say, let's go, man. Let's go back to some, great intertwined trading partner. I love you, Xi. You're great. Trump is much more able to be protean in that respect than most of the people he's appointing and most of the national security establishment, which would like to see China as an enemy. China's a good enemy for the United States. It's got a military, it's a place, it doesn't really have an ideology that it's exporting. It's much better than Islamic terrorism, right? Which is just hard to pin down and you don't know where it is and you don't know where to attack it. So, we'll see. I think I am clearly on the losing side of this contemporary argument. But I'm going to keep reminding people of, be careful what you wish for. There are huge costs to trying to bring China down if that's really your goal, in a way that was just not true for the Soviet Union. And we could be smarter about this and wiser and more self-interested.
Harold, thank you for coming back. Appreciate it.
Does that answer
Jeff,
your questions, Harold? Does that address that? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Jeff, welcome in. Tell folks where you are, who don't know who you're supporting, who you voted for president, and what's on your mind, please.
I voted for Trump. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
And I have a lot of questions I could ask Zach, but I was going to follow up on the Chevron thing, but I think I'm going to ask you this one. Is our country not in a debt spiral? I mean, I think you could keep. I used to work on the Hill, and we used to, back when the budget was $2.5 trillion a year, and we had $100 billion deficits, and we were horrified by them. I mean, now we've got. I think you could freeze spending, and you probably have more recent information than I do, but I think we're looking at multi-trillion-dollar debt, deficits every year, and debt heading to what, 10 years out, 50 trillion north of that. I mean, how do we ever reel this back in?
Look, I think the short answer is we don't in any real time. The question is, like, we're in a debt spiral, and then the question, of course, is, does it matter? So 30% of that $30 trillion is government obligations owed to itself, which doesn't mean they're not real. It just means they can be endlessly rolled over at a price, but they are never going to be repaid under any framework. And more of our debt is debt we owe ourselves, and we're probably going to solve some of the Social Security issues by writing ourselves government IOUs to ourselves. More and more of our debt is not held by foreigners. So foreign purchasing of U.S. debt has gone down, domestic purchasing has gone up. And I think it's really a question of, what is the financing capacity of the society and the government to manage the interest payments on that debt, which are clearly not crushing right now, nor would they be crushing at $2 trillion, meaning
we're about to find out, aren't we?
We are about to find out. We are a $30 trillion economy. By the time that interest on that debt hits $2 trillion, we will likely be close to a $50 trillion economy. We say that an average American can spend 30% of their gross income on mortgage and housing payments. The equivalent for the society would be $30 trillion in interest payments. I'm not suggesting we should. I'm just giving you a kind of what we judge to be acceptable levels of debt.
Right.
And I think people miss the fact that as long as the dollar is the global currency, which, there's no horizon in the next 10 years where that changes. The amount of latitude that gives the United States is massive. Now, it likely decreases economic growth over time because you're spending X amount of money basically uselessly to pay off prior spending. And consumption spending is also fairly useless. I mean, I know everyone on this call, many people on this call probably don't like the CHIPS Act. Or the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think there's lots about those that are pork-ish. But the idea of investing meaningfully for the future as a form of government spending, particularly in R&D, does potentially yield results. The idea of just funding consumption doesn't. So yeah, we're in a debt spiral. I am of the opinion that at no point in the next 4 to 10 years is that going to matter, as much as you hate it. And you can we can stand on the soapbox and say it's going to matter. But if it's too far away, it just doesn't matter. That's not how governments behave.
Yeah,
I got
Jeff,
you. Yeah,
thank you.
I thought it would have already mattered by now. So I've been wrong to this point. I thought we would have.
Jeff,
Thank you, sir.
I've been told it's going to matter my entire career in journalism. Literally my entire career. I used to read Robert Samuelson in the Washington Post, my hometown paper. He'd write a column every few months saying, "This is be the end of us, United States. China's going to, eat our lunch, etc." Hasn't happened yet, so I've sort of given up. But thank you
Great
for
platform,
coming.
Mark.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the question. Zach, thank you for joining. We always love having you here. We hope you'll come back as Donald Trump names his economic team and tell us what you think.
Good thing.
All right, Zach, thank you. All right, folks, tell you about a few things. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Dan, Sean, and I will be here. Morning meeting. You might have heard of it. Tomorrow night, 6 p.m. on this program, Steve Elmendorf. Google him if you don't know who he is. One of the smartest stalwarts of the Democratic Party. He's been a Capitol Hill aide to Dick Gephardt. He's been a big fundraiser for the party, very close to every leading Democratic figure of the last however many years he's been involved. Very, very smart guy and cares deeply about the party. And Steve and others will be here to talk about what the party can do. As part of our series, D-Future, if you're a Democrat, if you care about rebuilding the party, this is the place where we're hosting these conversations. We'd love for you to come and ask Steve questions, give Steve advice. If you give Steve suggestions about what the party should do and they're good ideas, he'll have the influence to take them to the top figures in the party. So please join us for that. Pete Buttigieg is at Harvard tonight. And he gave a speech and he said, amongst other things, "I'm in kind of a weird mood right now." That sounds like the Pete Buttigieg I know. Now, big announcement, which I'm not supposed to announce tonight, but I'm going to. Don't stop me. Tuesday, the 19th, 1 week from tonight. 1 week from tonight. The morning meeting after dark. Sean, Dan, and I will be appearing live at the Comedy Cellar in Manhattan. Okay? One night only, live show, two-way, in person. If you're in New York City or you want to plan a nice fall trip to New York City, you can come, go to the Comedy Cellar website or twoway.tv. You can read about how to get tickets, either the VIP tickets, which come with a smaller meeting with the three of us, or the regular tickets. So there'll be more on Substack and on Twitter, and we'll talk about it on the show tomorrow. But you all are the first to hear about this event, the morning meeting after dark, 1 week from tonight here in Gotham City. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in 12 hours, or sorry, 14 hours here on Two Way, and we appreciate everybody who came on and shared and asked questions, and we're very grateful to Zach for joining us. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.